Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Timothy Jones. I am IT Help Desk staff and one of the IT trainers here on campus at SUNY Buffalo State College in Buffalo, New York. And this morning we're going to cover creating an electronic form using Adobe Acrobat, which will allow recipients to fill out their information and sign the form, and then return it without the need for physically printing it, physically mailing it, or physically returning it to an office upon completion. As our topic today is a little more of a deep dive than some others we've covered in the past, we wanted to open up right at the top with a quick outline and actually point out a few things you'll want to listen for as you're going through it the first time. Our total runtime will be probably about 30 minutes, but we'll also be having indexed time code below the video in the description, and you'll be able to click on any of those time markers, and that'll bring you directly to that part of the video. And while the topic today is how to create an interactive form from a scanned original, we know a lot of other departments are using forms currently that are either non-interactive PDFs or, in some cases, something like a Microsoft Word document. These steps will still be very useful for those people. It's just that you'll be disregarding the first couple steps. We'd like to point out that forms created here can still be shared online the exact same way current forms are, so they can be uploaded and linked directly on the website, so students will be able to download them, and in these cases, fill them out, save those changes, and return them electronically by something like email. And we'll also point out that part of the advantage of this process is the documents we're going to show you how to set up today play really nicely with an Acrobat feature called Adobe Sign, which is basically a more formal way to request a signature or filling out information and then a signature on a document, which is emailed directly to the student, in this case through an official school account, and it then keeps a record of that signature for both the sender and the recipient. And please do note some later mentions in the video about some best practices related to which type of digital signature you're requesting on these documents, and a few mentions of accommodations for screen readers that you'll want to pay attention to. So starting off, let's just get a look at exactly what we're starting with. So we're not going to start quite from scratch, but we are going to start from, I think, what a lot of people imagine to be kind of a worst case scenario with some of the forms they're working with. So this file here started its life probably a long time ago, and over the years it was either photocopied or faxed, and basically it ended up as an image file of what the form actually looks like. So we don't have any actual editable electronic copy of this yet. It's just an image file, in this case a PNG, and it has obviously information up top. It has form areas which require a little bit of composition and are actually long form. It has checkboxes here, and down at the bottom it needs multiple signatures. So a lot of different factors in here, but as we'll show, this actually isn't too bad to work with and gives us a pretty good canvas to show off these tools. So it's probably good to touch on one of the first stumbling blocks that people might run into when they've got a file like this on their computer and they want to start working with it as an electronic document. So we have our file right here. This is our file open.png. It's the image file of the form that we're trying to convert. And what may happen is if you, let's say, double click it, what'll actually happen is it'll just open up in whatever the default image editor program is on your computer. So in my case, it's Adobe Photoshop. For a lot of people, it might just be the photo viewer built into Windows, and we actually don't want that. That's not useful to us. So if you do know to open it up in Adobe Acrobat, you can open the Acrobat program itself, and we're just going to go up in the upper left and go to File and Open. And here we'll run into another maybe confusing point is this is our desktop, and that's the area that the file should be in, and we're not seeing it. So what you'll need to do is down below in the right, there's this pull-down menu. One more time. And that shows, right now it's only looking for Adobe PDF files. We want to change this to all files. Once we choose that, that PNG file will now show up. We'll be able to click it once to select it, and we're just going to go down to Open. So we've now got the file in our Adobe Acrobat DC. It is not yet editable. It's just the image file that we had before that we're looking at here, and it has not yet been saved as a PDF. But you will notice in the upper left-hand corner, it'll show when we do save it, it'll save by default as the existing name, so file open.pdf. Now, we currently have our file, the image file that we're going to be turning into our form, open up in Acrobat DC, but let's actually take a step back and get a sense of the lay of the land, the interface that you're going to be using in Acrobat. So in the upper left-hand corner, I'm just going to click on this Home button. That'll bring us back to the Home tab that opens up whenever you open up Acrobat and you don't currently have a file active. So up at the top, you'll see some common tools for creating the documents. You'll have this area here for the recent files, and to the right of the Home button is Tools. And this is kind of interesting because it lets you both, it shows you a full list of the tools you might use for creating or editing PDFs, but on the right hand side we have our Quick Tools bar. And what's nice about this is if there's a feature that we're likely to be using, you can add it here, and if there's one that you're not likely to be using, you can remove it. So for example, if you don't expect to be using combined files, you can move your cursor over to this X on the right hand side, click it, and that'll actually remove it from this quick menu. Now, if you realize at a later point that you do want that, you can come to this Tools tab and basically just click and hold, and we can drag this back over here and put it in whatever order you want. Very similarly, if you plan to be using Prepare Form a whole lot, which we'll be using for this demo, you can click and drag that and bring it up to the top. In addition to that, the actual files that you have open in Acrobat, they're treated kind of like tabs in a web browser. So our file open.pdf that we were looking at before, I'm just going to click on that tab and that'll bring it to the front. If you have more than one of these documents open, you can actually click and drag them left and right to change their order. And when you need to jump into one, you can just quickly pop over to it by clicking on it, just the same as any of the other tabs up here. With that little bit about tools out of the way, let's actually jump in and start using that prepared form tool, which we brought up on the right-hand side. So with the file we want to be working with selected, we have that tab active. I'm just going to go to this right-hand side and click Prepare Form. That will bring us to a page here that confirms the document we're looking at that we're going to be preparing. There is a checkbox down below. This document requires signatures. We actually don't want to choose that at this time. That's pretty easy to control later on, and this can actually kind of snag things a little bit. It's not a problem if you choose it, but we're not going to be checking that box. And we basically just need to click Start. Now, once we click Start, it's going to bring up a message, which can be a little confusing. It's not anything you need to worry about. It's basically just warning you that the original file you're working from, that PNG we were working from, that's going to stay exactly as it is wherever it was on your hard drive. But we're going to be saving a new copy of the file as an actual PDF, which is what we'll be working from here. So I'm going to click Save. It'll bring up the file folder here, ask us where we want to save it. I'm going to save it to our desktop. I'm going to leave the file name the same as it was before, and it's going to show us here that it's saving as a PDF file. So really all we need to do is click Save. So we now have the PDF version of the file here. And as you can see, the software has already tried to do its best guess of where some of these forms will need to be on the paperwork and kind of what to label them. We're going to be tweaking this quite a bit. And actually, this form was chosen in part because the software had a little trouble recognizing it. So it gives us some opportunity for manually changing things as we go. But something we're going to be doing first is we're actually just going to click with our mouse button, the left mouse button, somewhere blank on the form. And what this will do, as you can see in the bottom right, is it's done its best job of converting the document to editable text. We're going to zoom in here and show you that message that came up. It says text has been recognized, and it shows the language. And you can change some of the scanned document settings in this settings panel here. We basically don't need to touch that, so we can just dismiss this by clicking on the X. And we're going to zoom back out, and all of this text now is editable. It's showing up as it will be written, but something I'll point out is, let's actually zoom in here. If you edit this text, by default, it's leaving the appearance of the lettering as it was. So if we click on Buffalo here, it looks pretty normal now, but if I type in the word Buffalo to replace it, see how that L looks a little different, kind of a little odd? It's letters that it can't use exactly as they are, it will be replacing with an actual font or with a letter from somewhere else in the document. So as you can see, this Buffalo State that I've retyped looks a little odd. So it's just something to be aware of when you are editing or revising the actual text in the document, there may be some oddities that you introduce when you do those. I'm just going to undo both of these and leave those exactly as they were. Zoom out. Sorry about that. And I guess real quick, let's just touch on the toolbar up top. So as we said before, we're in the Prepare Form tool. And from left to right horizontally, we have our Prepare Form tools. The one we'll be using most frequently is the arrow tool here. And if you click into that, it basically lets you select any of these objects within the document. As I said before, you can click into a line and text it as though, edit it as though it were a text document. And this also lets us select and move around any of these forms that the software has put in automatically. And the most important one after this is going to be right here, and that's our Add a Text Field tool. So if we click into that, we now have that tool selected, and the icon, your cursor rather, will look like this. So you can basically just position it where you think it'll look best, and click once with your left mouse button, and drop that in. And it asks you to put in a field name here in the yellow area, so we're just going to type in Prepared By. And you have the option to put in a checkbox of whether it's a required field. You generally don't want these to be a required field unless you've really kind of planned out where you need them to be on the document, because it can cause some problems. For example, if two people need to sign the document, the first person who is expected to sign the document may not have all the information and certainly won't have that second signature. So that first person may not actually be able to complete it if you set one of the required fields to something that they won't be able to complete. We have that in there, and I'm now going to just click in an empty area here, and that will update the actual field to Prepared By. And you can kind of hover your cursor over the edges here. Let's actually zoom in to make that a little more visible. The cursor there, it has the double bar icon. We can now click and drag to resize that. And that also works at the top and bottom. We can click and drag to resize that. And you basically want to maximize the visibility for it while still making it look consistent with the rest of the form. So having it a little taller here isn't a problem, but you wouldn't necessarily want to make it quite this tall, because that would make all the text in this field that much larger when someone types into it. And one more time, we can click over here into the Form tool and drop one in here for the phone number. And we can resize, well, let's change the name first. Let's do phone number. Again, we can resize it now. Click and drag that over. That's probably pretty good. Yeah, and you can manually place these. It's pretty easy to kind of drag them around if you want to reposition them just for aesthetics. If you already have a form in place, so for example, this remit to address line that the software put in automatically, with your left mouse button, if you just double click this with the arrow tool selected, we're going to double click here. That will open up the text field properties page. And this will let us change kind of the name for the field and some of the other options. So the tooltip I'm actually going to erase for now. And the name of the field we're going to change to remit to address line 1. We're just going to click close. And as you can see, that's changed it to remit to address line 1. And kind of click and drag that around so it looks a little better. And we're going to double click remit to address 2, which is another one of those automatic ones. Once again, that brings up the text field properties. I'm going to clear the tooltip for now, and we're just going to change that to remit to address line 2, and we can click close. So we now have some pieces of this filled out. We've gotten our basic type of field that we can put in, which is for text entry. I'm actually going to hit escape to cancel out of this. And what we want to do down here, you'll notice we have checkboxes, and the software didn't recognize those at all. And part of that is just because the software has a little trouble with these. They tend to be positioned very close together. So that's something else that we'll be tweaking manually. Let's actually click into toolbar up at the top here. There's Add Checkboxes. We're going to click that, and that's now our cursor. Defaults to about this big. And we can resize these just the same as the other fields. But we're going to click, add that in. I'm going to zoom in for visibility. And by default, it chooses a field name. Something that we need to understand is that you do need to name these individual checkboxes. So this by default goes to checkbox 7. If we kind of placed and resized this and then copy and pasted it a whole bunch of times with the same name, unfortunately all those checkboxes would be linked. So someone receiving the form, if they checked one box, it would check all of them that had been pasted that same way. So we want to avoid that. So we're going to change this to 1400 student loan. And this is not a required field automatically. Let me zoom that out. So we're going to click off, and we can now use the arrow tool again and resize that a little bit just so it fits nicely. Actually zoom in again, sorry about that. So this has the name 1400 student loan. And if we want to, we can go through that process back and forth. But what we're going to do is just click to have this tool selected, and I'm going to use copy. And you can use Control-C on your keyboard, but we're going to copy it. I'm going to click off, and I'm going to right-click and choose Paste, which is the same as Control-V. And it'll drop it here in the middle of the document, just somewhere in the view that is kind of out of the way. I'm going to zoom out one more time, just to give us a little more space. I'm going to click and drag this over. Oh, it's having us resize. Click and drag that over. Place that nicely. And as you can see, by default, it has the exact same name as the one we copied it from, that 1400 student. So if we make this document as it is, we will have a problem because all of those will be linked. So what we want to do is, I'm going to zoom in for visibility, and we're going to double click that. And that, very similar to the normal forms, will bring us to the properties. And we just want to change that name to something else. So in this case, we're going to change that to 6600 refunds, which is the name of that exact checkbox line. We can just click close, and that's now a separate checkbox. Now, so far we've just been using this prepare form toolbar up at the top over here. So we've clicked on the individual icon and then move the cursor down and place those. And some of you might be thinking that's probably not the fastest way to work. And thankfully, mercifully, at any place on the form, as long as you're in this edit mode for prepare form, you can actually just use the right mouse click button and choose the type of field that you want to put in. So for example, if you want to put in a text field, you can just right click and then choose that, place it, and name it as necessary and resize as necessary. That can go quite a bit faster, especially if you've got a lot of work on your desk. And for example, before we went up and used the actual add checkboxes icon up here on the top and manually moved it down here, we can actually just right click and choose checkbox. And that will turn our cursor into the right kind of icon. We can click, place, and resize. We can double click it to bring up the checkbox properties. So for example, we can change the name of this checkbox to 7100 professional services. Assuming I can type it out. Let's close that. Now, one of the other advantages to using the right click is the thing we were trying to avoid before, where more than one checkbox had the same name and would then be linked and they would all check or would all not check. When you right click and place a new one, it automatically brings up a new number for each of those, so that won't be a redundant checkbox. And just to kind of show you what we're working with here, I'm going to create a checkbox. I'm going to leave the name as checkbox 13, and I'm going to copy and paste a few of these so we can just see that mistake that might come up if you leave the checkbox names exactly the same. And one of the nice things built into the Prepare Form tool is the Prepare button up in the right-hand corner. So at any point while you're working on this form, we can click on Preview. We're going to left-click Preview, and that will basically bring us to the form as it will be seen by the person filling it out. So for example, you can click Prepared By and put in person's name here. You can look at the phone number blank and be, oh, will a phone number with an area code actually fit? So if we do 716-878-4357 and then click out, it does fit. And we can say, oh, okay, that's a good size form. Or if you notice it's a little too short, you can go back into Edit over here, and that'll bring you back to the view we were working with before, and maybe you can extend it out a little bit. Now, something to point out is that when you use that preview button and you fill in information, that information will actually stay in there. So when you're done testing, you're going to want to clear all this out. But let's go back into preview, and let's clear out the person's name, Let's clear out that phone number. So those are now blank again. So when we return to editing the form up here, those will no longer have the dummy information. But let's scroll down. So we were careful with these to make sure that they worked independently from one another. However, these three boxes here all had the same name. So when we click one of these, they all click. And that's the exact problem we wanted to avoid when we're just copying and pasting forms that have the exact same name. Each of these forms needs to have a different designation. So we're going to go back to Edit, going to click, drag, and select all three of these, and we can actually just press the Delete button on our keyboard, or you can right-click and cut those. And something I'll point out that can be a little helpful when you're organizing and making sure you don't have any names that have the exact same field is this Fields area, which gives you a full list of everything that's been created so far. And you can just click on that. That'll actually select the exact form, or in this case, the exact checkbox that you have. And that could be useful, let's say, if you just want to nudge it a little bit and you don't want to have to be like super precise with your mouse. Let's say we want to move that 6600 refunds button. We can click on that in the fields, and actually using the arrow keys on the keyboard, that will let us choose them one by one. Actually, let's go back in to 6600 refunds and click over here. And we can use the arrow keys on our refund or on our keyboard to slide that around if we want to reposition it. So as long as you're clicked into Fields area, you can use the arrow keys to select different items on the form. And when you have one of those selected, you can also just click into the main area and use those arrow keys again to reposition things a little more precisely. So behind the scenes, I've completed a little more work on this document and gotten it pretty close to what we can use for a final file to be distributed to students or to other staff and faculty members on campus. Just as a little bit of a review, we started with a PNG, which is just an image file, a scanned image of an existing form that we did not have electronically. At the start of our editing process, we made a PDF version of it, basically a file save as process to just give us something to work with. And what I've done now is I've completed the form. I've added in all the necessary fields. I've done a little bit of testing to make sure those behave the way I expect them to. And I've renamed the file as something that other users would be able to figure out exactly what that form is about. So let's open that up real quick in Acrobat. We have the form here. As you can see, there's probably a little bit more tweaking I could do for the sake of, I guess, minutia, but otherwise this is a perfectly functional form. We have fields here that specify the signatures but aren't required, so that as this form requires two different signatures, one person signing it won't interfere with the other person signing it. We have functionally independent checkboxes, and basically this form is good to go. Something that I will mention that may come up is a prompt that will ask you about the screen reading order. That's automated. It's something that you do want to make a choice for when you're creating the form. It's basically for screen readers, for assistive readers built into either Windows or Acrobat itself. It basically lets it know whether it should read top to bottom, left to right. It lets it know whether it should kind of try to do its best job of inferring the order it should be reading, or if you need to manually specify the reading order just so anyone using those adaptive services can actually parse the form and use the form on their end. And you can actually go up to View and Read Out Loud. The Read Out Loud feature is a really good way to do kind of a first draft test of how this will work for someone using an assistive screen reader. So I'm going to click that to activate it, and it's now active. And we can now go back up to View, go to Read Out Loud, and we can now read this page only or read to end of document. And the way this will work is the computer will be reading exactly what someone else would be getting out of the document. So I'm just going to click this, and we're going to listen in to how the document sounds.
Buffalo State College Foundation payment request. All information must be filled in and original backup attached before check is issued. Prepared by text, phone hashtag, phone number, date, building and room hashtag, building and room number, date, ACCT name, ACCT name, ACCT no.
Now I'm going
ACCT
to
name,
interrupt it.
IE name,
And as you'll notice there, it is not doing top to bottom, left to right reading. It's trying to do its best version of it. So you might notice that it actually read date after it read phone number and building and room number. And that's actually deliberate in this case. That was something I chose to have it do because the date applies to all of those factors. There's a lot of individual tweaking that you'll do or that you'll want to do as you iterate on the different versions of the form. But for the most part, once you have the form in this state, it's ready to be uploaded to a website. It can be sent directly to students to be filled out and signed. We have another video actually on using the Adobe Sign feature to make direct requests for signatures on documents, which can then be kind of tracked and backed up electronically in a way that's a little easier to deal with. I do want to mention and do want to clarify that it is awesome having these digital copies of the forms after they've been completed and signed, but it's a very, very good best practice to have redundant copies. That includes both electronically, having backups on either a network share folder or on a local hard drive used by the department. And in addition to that, it might even be a good idea, depending on the department's workflow and size, to make physical printed copies, which are then filed on your end. The advantage of the electronic forms is that students don't have to physically be in the office to drop them off. They don't have to physically print them out. They don't have to pay for postage and worry about documents potentially being lost or misplaced when they're being physically routed around campus and off campus in some cases. However, you always want as many redundant copies of these documents as is possible. And again, electronic and physical, we need to keep in mind that we need to keep these in the long term. The next person working with these documents may not have the same awareness of the individual file structure, so the more places these are stored, the better. One last topic we need to touch on, kind of as a result of some of the workflows a lot of users will be dealing with on campus, is how to partially fill out and prepare and sometimes even sign a document in advance that's then being sent through another user to either formally approve or to review and pass along. So we're going to open up our completed document, or almost completed document as it turns out here. And by default, it'll open up into the fill view, so you can, add as much information in advance as you want to this. So, for example, if we add in just office user and add in their telephone number up here, you can fill out as much or as little of this as you want. And if you go to File and Save, that will save this filled in information to that version of the file. So as a result, it's often a good idea to actually use Save As, and that'll save a new copy of the file with that filled in information and leave the original empty version on the computer. But for example, the thing that I think a lot of people run into is the way I set up this file. If we look at this little red icon here, I'm going to zoom in real quick. Let's dismiss that. I'm going to zoom in real quick. This red icon indicates that this signature field needs a digital ID signature. And a lot of users on campus won't have that. A lot of users on campus won't particularly want to deal with that. So what happens in this fill view, if I click on that, is it'll prompt us to configure a digital ID, because I don't have one on this computer. And we don't want to deal with this because more or less the campus does not have a centralized database of these signatures. So you would be manually setting one of those up. And some users are able to do that, and some users actually have those already. But for the sake of this, we don't want to deal with that at all. So we're going to cancel out of this. And what we're actually going to do is go in and edit this form. So we're going to go back to the Prepare Form tool. That'll bring us into this view. We have our arrow tool up, and I'm actually going to click and delete that line. I'm going to click and delete the countersigner's signature. And because, for example, in this case, if we want to sign this in advance, we're going to use up here the signed document by typing or drawing signature. So this is an image that we'll be adding to the document of a signature. So I'm just going to left click this. And this will bring up actually all the all the signatures that are already set up, or it gives you the option to create a new one. So my signature is already in here, so I'm going to click that. And that will now scroll down. It'll give me this, and I can then left mouse click to place it wherever I want. Very similar to everything else. I can click and drag to kind of resize that to let it fit a little better. And in this case, I will click the line below it to please print name, and I can just say Timothy Jones. I can date that with today's date. Click off. And basically, we're in the fill and sign tool right now. It just automatically brought us in here. But if, for example, I'm completing this and signing it on someone else's behalf to send along, to, for example, for the co-signer's name, I can go File, Save As, and we're just going to choose the location. I'm going to send it to our desktop, and I'll just change the file name and say prepared for X. And we'll just save that. I'm going to close this now. And now we have, in addition to our blank document, we have this form that was prepared for someone. And I'm going to double click into this one more time to open it up. And as you can see, all the information and the signature that we filled in advance is already there. And this countersigner's name no longer requires a digital ID. And that's a good idea, especially if you're sending these to students, because students won't have those digital IDs by default. But as we touch on in another video, the built-in Adobe Sign feature is exactly what we want to use for that, because that'll let users sign emails, sign documents, and add in and fill documents by email. They don't need an Adobe account. It can be sent to their official school email address. And that tool is down here if you happen to need it. As always, feel free to contact us at the IT Help Desk at SUNY Buffalo State College. You can get us by email at ithelpdesk@buffalostate.edu. You can call us on the phones at area code 716-878-HELP. That's 878-4357. And you can also get us online at itportal.buffalostate.edu.